Remember, the content on our show is for information only.
It is not intended to provide medical or other professional advice.
Hello and welcome to Placebo, the podcast where each week we discuss and evaluate news articles about healthcare and medicine. Or
Perfect.
Something like that.
Perfect.
I'm Logan Richards, and this is my sister.
I'm Kaylin Richards.
And the topic of this week's episode will be exercise in general.
Great.
Old age as another category.
Exercise, old age. What more?
What else?
And what are the best types of exercise?
Okay. All right.
For old age and for anybody.
So we're going to be focusing on two articles, one from the New York Times, which came out on February 8th, 2017.
Like
called
a few days ago.
Lessons on Aging Well from a 105-year-old cyclist. You heard me right.
Yeah.
And the other from 538, which is more of a statistical analysis type of news outlet from Nate Silver, called What's the Optimal Speed for Exercise? And this came out sometime last year, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, July 17th, 2015.
Okay.
And we should clarify that the article was not written by Nate Silver. He runs the website, I believe.
Oh, yes. That sounds right.
All right. This article was by Emily Oster, and the one from the New York Times is by Gretchen Reynolds.
We don't know anything about either of the two of them.
I think they're both reporters.
I think you have to be like a statistics PhD to write at 538.
Oh, I don't know, but...
I don't know either.
All right. How do you want to start this discussion, brother?
I think we should start first with a quote from the New York Times article.
Okay.
About a recent world record that was set in a category called 1 hour cycling, which means you ride as far as you can on an indoor track for 60 minutes.
Okay.
And
that is 1 hour.
The main character of the story here, Mr. Robert Marchand.
I think that's perfect.
All
Robert
right.
Marchand.
He's French.
Yeah.
And he's also 105 now.
Currently. Yeah.
So a quote directly from the article, Mr. Marchand pedaled more than 14 miles, setting a global benchmark for cyclists age 105 and older.
It's amazing.
Which is probably one of my favorite lines.
I'm not very familiar with bicycling. How fast is 14 miles in an hour?
So, yeah, he's going 14.
I mean, he's going 14 miles an hour. I get that, but
he's going 14 miles an hour. I think
like if you're out riding your bike, how fast is that?
So we're from Seattle. There's a popular flat paved bike trail that goes throughout the city that people exercise basically on their bikes, right? The Burke-Gilman.
Okay.
And I'd say that is an average speed for the Burke-Gilman for people who are commuting or exercising. I won't count the people who are just lollygagging,
okay,
sightseeing.
So he's making progress.
Yeah. If you are going somewhere, that's probably a pretty average speed. I know that a couple of years ago I did the Seattle to Portland bike ride. Mm-hmm. And so my goals for training for the longer rides was 17 miles an hour as an average pace. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously he's 105.
He's 105. That's pretty amazing.
So it's not slow, but it is also not fast.
He's not like sprinting either.
No.
Okay.
Well, he was probably sprinting,
for him,
right?
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the reason, obviously, that this story is interesting is because he is 105.
He's 105, and he's biking at a good pace.
And the picture, he looks maybe 75.
Yeah, he looks great. He's got his biking spandex outfit on, got his helmet.
Well, the French do love their cycling.
He's on his bike. Yeah, he looks great.
So I think one of the key points in this article was that basically the field of exercise science tells us that after age 50, your VO2 Max, which is basically your body's ability to use oxygen so that you can exercise.
Yeah.
That's...
to effectively process oxygen and send it to the muscles.
Sure.
Is that it?
And
Or
you have more VO2 max. It means you're going to run faster for longer. You're going to bike faster for longer. You're going to be less affected by, you won't be huffing and puffing from
it seems like your
running down the street.
endurance kind of too, like your general endurance.
I guess it could be used as a
Measure of
proxy
endurance.
to measure that
Okay.
if you wanted to. People often refer to VO2 max as like a proxy for measuring fitness.
Okay.
So like
Just
if I have a
how
higher
overall fit are
VO2
you?
max, I'm more fit.
Okay.
There's probably plenty of controversy on that. Anyways.
It involves a lot of measurements we're not going to go into detail on. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, the reason, again, that this is interesting is because a study recently came out about Mr. Marshawn, and he, of course, is over 50 and
Significantly over double 50.
right, and was able to increase his VO2 max because he was someone who didn't exercise very much as growing up, and even far into middle age. It sounds like he didn't start exercising until much later in life.
It says after he retired. Now his jobs, it lists his working life consisted of being a truck driver, a gardener, a firefighter, and a lumberjack. Now, those are not really sedentary jobs. Those are all fairly active
truck
jobs.
driver, maybe.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the type of truck driver. If he's also
Maybe he was
unloading
like
the truck and loading it, or
Yeah, maybe he was like a dump truck driver.
yeah, I don't know what kind of truck driver.
If he's a
he
long
was.
haul trucker, I'm sure there are physically demanding parts of that job, but I
a lot
imagine
of
there's
sitting,
also
too.
quite a bit of sitting.
Yeah, but gardener, firefighter, and lumberjack, those are all quite active.
Yeah, fairly
Yeah.
active jobs.
But he didn't do any regular training or exercise until after he'd retired.
Yeah.
So we're assuming until his 60s, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and I will say that these types of cases that you hear about in the news where someone who is older than usual to be exercising a lot, that storyline is pretty common. The other one that I can think of is the Iron Nun. Have you seen those Nike commercials?
No.
So this is...
Oh, yes, I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know the exact story. It's similar, though. She didn't do a lot of exercising until she was much later in life. And then she started, and now she does triathlons, and
She's
she
a
was in a Nike commercial. She's a nun.
Yeah. Okay.
She's old, and she does Ironmans.
Okay.
So same kind of story, right?
Yeah. So it says like here that he already set a record when he was 100 or just over 100. And that's what brought him to the attention initially of this exercise science professor, Veronique Billet, at a university in France.
Okay.
And so then she, I think, must have contacted him, and then he began a workout program that she provided to see if he could even further increase his VO2 max, because they measured it at that point when he was a little after 100, I think.
I would not have known that Veronique was a woman's name.
Veronique, it says her lab.
Oh. Well, I would have known from that. If you had just said Veronique, I
think it's the French version of Veronica.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so she basically prescribed like classic 80-20 workout. That's been written about a ton.
Which is 80% low intensity and 20% high?
Yeah. Again, unfortunately, I think this episode will make clear that the field of exercise science is evolving. There's a lot of controversy, and with that, there's also this kind of, I don't know, I think, so exercise science is trying to be a science, is trying to be a hard science, like chemistry or
physics.
I don't know. Probably closer to medicine, right? Because medicine is
Which is not exactly a hard science.
No, it's not a hard science, but it has aspects of chemistry and physics in it that make people feel like it's science. Well, it is science, right? But that make it feel like the research is meaningful and actually telling you something. So exercise science is new and it's developing and it's trying to be that. But I think that there still is a lot of myth and just people telling people how to exercise because it worked for them. A
lot of, maybe until things are studied, it's just kind of common sense. Like, people think this works for them, so it's going to work, but it's never been studied or shown how or why it works or doesn't work. And
so, I mean, I'm not up on all the research in that. 80-20 is a pretty common workout. 80% super low intensity, basically nothing. I mean, if you're talking about like a training load type of thing. And then 20% very vigorous, high intensity, the complete opposite of what the 80% is, basically.
So it says, just a couple points about the exercise of this professor. She's talking about how she's finding, like we talked about, the VO2 max begins to decline after age 50 in a lot of people, even when they're frequently exercising, which I think, is kind of what you see as people age. They have less athletic endurance. Yeah. Right. But she was finding that if she had her older athletes exercising intensely, they could still increase their VO2 max. And she was kind of wondering if that could be the case on a centenarian, but she had not had the opportunity to try that out yet. But Mr. Marshawn, he was all for it, ready to go. And they did the program that we're talking about, the 80-20.
Right. He increased his VO2 max by 13%, but what it had been before, and he increased his pedaling power by 40%.
And this was over 2 years. 2 years he did the training program, and then they came back. So he's now 103, I think. Basically, she's saying this data suggests that you can improve your VO2 max and your performance in athletics at any age if there's not other issues going on in your body.
Right.
Right.
Which is a good message to spread overall, right? Because I think
it's never too late to stop smoking and start exercising.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And one thing they teach us in physical therapy school is that it's actually been it's been a fault, I think, of exercise, people who prescribe exercise in the past to be too to not prescribe enough intensity to older people or
that you're afraid of doing damage. And then, if someone has heart problems or something, then you should be aware of that. But
right. I guess comorbidities aside,
yeah,
it was clearly emphasized in school that intensity prescription, especially in like a geriatric population or an older population, is very important, and that you need to pay attention to that. And it probably needs to be, if you feel like it's too easy, it probably needs to be more, because you can make those types of differences the same that you would be expecting in a younger or middle-aged person in terms of adding ability to muscles or increasing strength, increasing endurance.
Now, they talk about how they didn't use like a heart rate monitor or something to measure the intensity of the workout for him.
What did they use then?
They used his own judgment and rating the intensity of the workout. So
RPE scale? Yeah,
only which is the rate of perceived exertion. And usually I introduce that on a 1 to 10. Yeah. But in France, apparently they do a 1 to 20 scale for RPE.
No, that's the original.
It is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So he was supposed to be doing for his 80%, the lower intensity workouts was supposed to be at a 12 or less on the 1 to 20. And then the 20%, the higher intensity workouts, were supposed to be at a 15 or above. And so he was just supposed to use his own judgment as to where that felt like to him. They also gave him a pedaling frequency rate that he should kind of try and fall within for those two.
Yeah, that's the original Borg scale, which is like the official name of the RPE scale. And it's supposed to correlate to, if you multiply the number that the person is giving by 10, that's supposed to roughly correlate to their heart rate. So if he's a 12, his heart rate might be around 120. And the 1 to 10 scale is like a modified version.
It just makes it's easier for people to understand or make judgments on, I think.
Right.
Too.
But the whole point of the original scale was that you could estimate heart rate, which is part of trying to figure out what intensity level he's at. You need to have some measure of intensity, and Borg is not doing the RPE scale is not perfect, but it is something. Otherwise you really have nothing for the research to.
Right. Well, no, it's fine. We talked about how he set another record when he was 103. And then you started out the podcast talking about how he set now a further record at 105.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty impressive.
He's pretty impressive. he says here at the end of the article that he's going to try again and see if he can do better. Maybe next year when he's 106.
And he can make the cycling world record people have to create another new category for...
They might just stick with above 105.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Now, they do point out, which I think is responsible, that, just because he's bicycling and doing the specific 80-20 workout program is probably not the only factor here.
No.
Right?
He's clearly he's clearly got unique genes,
I would say,
of some sort.
Yeah. He's got good genes. They talk about lifestyle. I think we've talked about this before in our maybe longevity episode, where we talked about diet and then social factors in contributing to health, especially as you get older, and being able to have a long life and have good quality of life. So it says he's very optimistic and sociable, is a quote in here from the professor, and that he has many friends. And he also has a simple diet. Do you want to just focusing on yogurt, soup, cheese, chicken, and a glass of red wine at dinner? I don't know what kind of soup. That is a very simple diet. He doesn't have any vegetables in there. Maybe it's vegetable soup.
All veggies in his soup.
Yeah. Otherwise, sounds pretty good to me.
He's got grapes.
Yeah, no fruits either. Maybe he doesn't have any desserts, it sounds like.
No, that could be good.
Yeah.
I do think the other thing they pointed out is that numerous studies suggest strong social ties are linked to longer life, which you brought up. Mm-hmm. But another thing we were taught in school is that a social environment is also suggests better results of an exercise class. So if you can promote that type, and again, there's no evidence to say that was part of it besides them saying he's a sociable guy.
Yeah.
But there are some studies to show that you can get better results of an exercise prescription or program with strong social ties in the class or in the group of people that are doing it together.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I wonder how Mr. Marshawn has been able to maintain his strong social ties. That would be another interesting thing, because a consistent thing I hear from a lot of older people that I know or that I work with is that their friends are all dying. They don't have many friends left.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for people of any age, but it's hard to make new friendships, especially when you're 105 perhaps.
Although he probably doesn't feel 105.
He
probably feels young, and he's probably in biking groups. And
maybe he's in a biking group. Yeah, I think that's the hard thing, is kind of maintaining those social connections, especially as you do age.
Yeah. Okay, so I think beyond just the fact that the story is amazing because of his age.
He's 105. He was born in 1911.
So anyways, I think the reason that that article was written, beyond it just being a cool story, is that there does seem to be some type of fascination with, of course, the American way of the American way of how can we do this easiest with the best results when it comes to things like exercise.
Which maybe is not Mr. Marchand's way being, Monsieur Marchand's way being French. Right.
No, probably not.
No.
And clearly he took his time and worked hard to get where he is. But we're going to transition to a more general article about what is the optimal speed for exercise. This is the 538 article that we mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And they too bring up the point that people are always wondering how should they exercise so that they can, lose weight, get faster, run longer, bike longer, swim longer, whatever you want to say. Mm-hmm. And so I found this article interesting because it tries to answer that question, which is, of course, many questions, by turning it into what speed of exercise will reduce your risk of death or your chance of death.
Now, they do mention the saber-toothed tiger, which, if your goal is to get away from saber-toothed tigers, I think the fast kind of exercise.
Yeah. Maybe they need more high-intensity intervals.
Yeah. But if it's just avoiding death from heart disease or stroke, or the more typical reasons people might die now.
And of course, they bring up the point that we are in an age where exercise is not necessarily a requirement for life, although perhaps it should be. Whereas in the past, you may have not survived. Could you not
get away from the tiger?
Get away from the saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
Or even less in the past, been able to manage a farm or find food or whatever.
Yeah.
Not being chased by ancient predators.
So what I'm reading in this article is I'm a little bit confused about a couple of things, but let's maybe talk through it.
Okay.
Okay.
So first they say there are a lot of studies that try and figure out which exercise is best.
But
particularly answering the reporter's question of what's the easiest way to reduce my chance of death. So he talks about the MET. She talks about the MET, which is an acronym for metabolic equivalent of task, and it's a way that exercise scientists have tried to quantify the intensity of various types of physical activities.
They taught us about those in occupational therapy because every activity has a MET assigned to it, like doing laundry, vacuuming, sweeping, which are related to functional tasks, like we worry about in occupational therapy.
It's not assigned; it's calculated.
It's calculated,
so
and then assigned to it.
One MET is supposed to be the metabolic equivalence of you sitting still, not doing anything. So it's basically your the amount of calories your body needs to burn to live. Kaylin right now is demonstrating one MET for the many viewers that we have in studio today.
Yeah, which is none. Then I started laughing, and then that wasn't accurate anymore.
Yeah. Laughing is probably 1.1 METs.
It depends on how hard you're laughing. Sometimes you feel very tired after you've laughed a lot. Have you ever experienced this?
Some ab contractions, perhaps.
Or sometimes your face is just a little sore from the face muscles.
There's a big long list of funny activities too, including normal activities of the approximate MET value. And I remember one is laying on the couch watching TV was actually 0.8 METs. So somehow you're using less METs than the least amount of METs possible.
Well, because you're laying versus sitting up.
So one MET is not necessarily like your basal metabolic rate. It's like you're
sitting up in a chair.
Yeah, it's a little bit above that. It's not, you're not in a comatose state, but apparently laying on the couch watching TV is a little bit closer to that state.
Oh gosh. Well, okay. So they found in this article that laying on the couch is not a good thing to do to prevent death.
Yes, you should likely do some walking or running or jogging.
Yeah, so they're specifically focused on walking or running or jogging as a form of exercise, not bicycling like our previous article, or swimming or anything else, just to keep simplify it a little bit.
Right.
Okay. So they talk about how some of the problems are that the studies are not comparing apples to apples, right? Like one study is maybe older people, and one study is running, and one study is younger people and walking, and different speeds that you can walk at or run at.
Yeah.
So it can be a little bit hard to compare directly over multiple studies.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a chart here, and it says at the bottom they have your METs per day, so how many METs you're exercising per day.
MET hours
per day.
Yeah.
And then here we have the rate of death and how that exercise changed also, the rate of death, right?
For specificity, it's not technically rate of death.
Hazard rate of death, sorry.
Yeah, they're using a more statistical method to devolve that. But I think we'll mostly talk about it as rate of death because there's no need to specify that much for us, I think.
Because so what I see is that could be 1.0 if there was no change in the how the exercise a change or affected the rate of death.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
And if it was 0.5, that would mean that the exercise kind of cut your risk of death in half over that period of time.
Yeah.
2 would be it would have doubled the rate of death, right? Or the risk of death.
I'm not sure on that, so.
You're not sure? Because what confused me is this chart which shows that for people that exercise for anything from 1 to 4 or 5 Met hours per day, it seems like it kind of cuts your risk of death down, like by about half compared to no exercise, is what I'm getting. And then there's this one weird data point way off the chart for people that exercised 8 Met hours per day, which doesn't mean 8 hours per day. It also involves the intensity of the working out. Mm-hmm. So it's either they're working out for a long time or they're working out very intensely.
They're doing the 7-second workout.
Yeah, very intensely.
Running uphill on a treadmill with weights in your hand or something. According
to this study, it seems like it double your risk of death.
Yeah, I recognize that is counterintuitive, but...
Oh, I see the reason. It's down here, 1 paragraph down, 2 paragraphs down.
Yeah, they do talk about that there is if you're exercising a larger amount than a significant amount, if you're doing a lot of exercise, much more than the average, much more than the American average population data, whatever, then there is kind of a bell curve where the benefit starts to decrease. That's what we've learned in, what I've learned in school.
Well, the benefit starts to decrease, but it doesn't mean you should die necessarily.
No.
But it does say that they think probably the issue with that data point is that it is maybe just a statistical artifact because it's actually a small sample size and 2 people happen to die in that study. It doesn't mention why they died.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it kind of threw that data point off.
I think I do wonder about that same type of phenomenon in the development of like this whole, bell curve in terms of exercising a ton and on the far end of way too much exercise actually being significantly worse for you. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's both counterintuitive and doesn't make and makes perfect sense, right? You think if you think the normal person here's someone, exercising way too much, right? Whistling. The average person says, "Oh, you're doing way too much exercise," and then they picture themselves doing that much exercise, and they're just, they say, "Oh, that must be awful for you."
Yeah, because I would feel awful if I did that.
But the people doing that much exercise are not the average person.
True.
And it's likely that they've spent a long time building up to that amount of exercise.
Like Mr. Marshawn. Most 105-year-olds, that would be inappropriate for them to be riding a bike. It would be not a good idea for them at all.
Or to try and set the 1-hour record for,
to exercise for an hour.
Yeah.
But for him, he's built up for that a long time, and it is a good challenge for him and appropriate for him.
So I've always wondered about that because it makes perfect sense because you think if you exercise too much, that's got to be bad for you, right? That's the kind of classic, like, running is bad for your knees cliche. Like, people just imagine themselves doing that type of exercise level. And
is running bad for your knees?
No.
What if you have bad knees?
There's a controversy.
What if you have bad knees already?
Again, this whole thing is trying to be a real science, but it's
hard.
Working its way there, right? So
yeah. So I guess one thing I wonder is, in general, probably there are smaller sample sizes for any exercise that's highly intense or very lengthy, because just fewer people of the population are going to do that. So maybe the data is always a little bit skewed in that.
Yeah, that's kind of the point I was trying to make.
Yeah,
is that
I thought you might be.
They put that this, there's not enough data really to say that we have a good idea of that particular data point because there's not a big enough sample size, and I wonder if that issue is true on the whole in terms of, is exercising too much really increasing your chance of death?
So to move on from that, because that's kind of a minor point in this article. Basically, what the studies are showing is that working out anywhere from this 1 or barely past 0, it looks like, Met hours per day to almost 5, really it decreases your hazard rate of death, but it doesn't increase as you do more and more exercise.
Yeah.
The rate is decreased when you do this kind of moderate to low amount of exercise.
I think the point is
and then it kind of stays around that level.
It's not linear.
Yes. So you would think like, if I run 20 minutes 3 times a day, if I run 3 times a week, not 3 times a day, if I run
workout.
1 hour 5 days a week, that's going to be even better for me. But that's not really what the studies are showing.
Not necessarily the case, especially if your body is not ready for that.
Right.
But
That's not really what they talk about here either, though, about training. Just like if you were building up and training and going to say, I'm going to be fit enough to run 5 days a week at an hour a day just because I think that's going to keep me alive longer, that's not really the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that's not a point that they're trying to bring up, but I think it's interesting because the person who is running 25 minutes 3 days a week and seeing that health benefit is a significantly different person than the person who's running whatever, an hour 7 days a week.
But they would say not as far as survivability.
Yeah, but see, I think
you're arguing with this with the
question. The question though is like the graph of if the exercise actually reduces your risk of death is not linear, and because when you first start to exercise and you've gone from either doing none or doing less than that, then the benefits are great. But when your body is already completely adapted to exercising and you're at the point where exercising, 7 days a week for an hour or 2 hours is what you do, there's much less gain to be had.
Right. I would say what the articles are finding is that if you like to exercise that much, go for it. And it might have other types of benefits for you.
Yeah.
But if your goal of exercising that much is to lengthen your life, it's not making any difference. You could work out way less than that. So what they say at the end is that basically, overall, taking the average from the different studies, it seems like the optimal pace is kind of like a light or moderate jog.
Right.
For, if you're technical, that would be like 5 to 7 miles per hour is what they're saying. And then maybe 25 minutes 3 times a week. That's plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For reducing your risk of death.
For reducing your risk of death. Doing more than that might get you a slight, more reduced risk, but not much.
Or it might be worse.
Or it might be worse if you're doing a ton, I guess.
Yeah.
Basically, don't feel bad if you're not spending every day working out, going to the gym.
The littlest amount that you can do is probably beneficial.
Yeah.
If you're worried about how much exercise you should be getting, probably just a small amount is fine.
And, more might be better. We're not saying don't exercise more if you want to. But I think maybe some people don't. You know how, what's that saying? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, something like that. People don't do something because they can't do it fully,
I'm pretty sure that was actually a quote by a runner.
Is it a runner? I've heard that quote. And I think in general, though, is like people don't do something because they want to do it really good and they can't, so they just don't do it at all. So just because you can't train for a marathon, don't feel like you shouldn't do any exercise. Is it from a runner? Who is it from?
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Is it? I thought it was just like a general saying. I didn't know it came to anybody.
Might be Buddha.
Or he could have run. I don't know if he was a big runner.
I could have said it.
Based on his statues, he doesn't look incredibly fit, but you don't know.
It's a sentiment.
This person says Voltaire said it. I don't know.
It's a sentiment that's been around for some time. Probably many, many notable people have said this in one way or another.
Many people have said it.
Including Kaylin Richards.
Google, when I typed in that sentence to see where it came from,
yes.
Google suggested people also ask, is the enemy of good? ? Like, that doesn't make any sense. What is that? Is the enemy of good?
That's the computer trying to figure out what's happening.
All right. Anyways, let's wrap it up here. Oh, I just wanted to mention one thing to give our caveat with all studies. Like, there's always things that are hard to control for and measure. The point that they're making in this article is that, these are not randomized studies, so they didn't just take random people and say, you're going to work out, you're going to not. These are people that were already runners.
Yeah.
And they just collected data on. So some people, someone who's already running is different than someone that never runs ever and wasn't going to start.
Right.
And so I don't know what the health or how that can
I took that to be an interesting point, too, beyond just the fact that it makes the variables harder to control.
Because they might make other health choices, like they might be just more exercise or interested in their health in general. Like they might eat more healthy. They don't. Whatever.
Yeah, like what's fundamentally different about the person who just becomes someone who exercises a lot versus the person who doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. And whether that doesn't necessarily have to be running or a sport even, right? What's the difference between someone who is remarkably active and someone who is the complete opposite?
Right, because you have to make a choice to be active.
There are interesting
or a choice
differences.
To be inactive, right? So, yeah.
There are interesting differences, and when you take the data of the people that have already selected which one they are on their own, that means you don't have a random group of people.
So they might have already been eating well, and that's just not even taken into account in this data at all. We don't know that.
Which is, again, why I think that the point that exercising more might actually be harmful, I'm not sure that that's true. I think that's the best our science can do at this point.
Not using all the factors.
Right.
Yeah. So I think to wrap up, what are our 3 main points from today?
Age is not a factor in how much you can exercise, or at least not as big a factor as people play it off to be.
It does not have to be a limiting factor necessarily. That's, I think, what we can say.
Age on its own.
On its own.
Of course, other things come with age that may or may not limit exercise.
Yes, but just because you are 105, if you are healthy otherwise, get out there. Get on the bike.
Yeah. And the other, I think...
you can get fitter. So for most people, you can get fitter. Don't think that you can't get fitter.
Right. The most general thing is that adding exercise is generally good and possible at any age or most situations, I'd say. That
you can have increased endurance and probably a longer life if you exercise.
And most of the time it ends in health benefits. Yeah. Exercise is medicine.
Was that 3 main points?
Yeah, close enough. Okay. Well, if you enjoyed the show, we will post the links to the articles in the description so that you can go and click and read and do whatever you want with those.
Yeah, I think they're both good articles. And the 538 one, and I think the New York Times one too, has links to the actual studies. Yeah, both of them do.
So you can do that as well.
Yep.
If you are interested in contacting us or giving feedback, the best place is probably our Facebook or our email.
placebopodcast@gmail.com. I've lost the password, though, so I need that again.
So don't email there expecting to reach Kaylin.
I cannot log in currently.
Thank you to James Aiken for our music.
Thank you to you for listening.
We'll be back next week with a new episode.
Bye.
Bye.